Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Tara O'Leary, and I'm the Manager of Alumni Relations at the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy. Thank you for joining us today for our second of our two-part Wellness RX series, which is part of the Office of Advancement's Alumni Networking and Education events. Today's event is a social prescription for creativity. If you missed the first event, a social prescription for mindfulness, please feel free to watch the event on the faculty YouTube channel. To stay up to date with alumni programming, please visit our website at pharmacy.utoronto.ca, where you will be able to find our alumni newsletter, events, and programs that the faculty offers our alumni and friends community. Before we start our event this afternoon, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of Indigenous people and remains home for Indigenous people across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'd now like to welcome our speakers today. Karen Sue-A-Quan is a graduate from the University of Toronto's Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy program. As a clinical pharmacist and a spiritual life coach, she blends both the science and soulful themes together to help others with a broader sense of health and life itself. Since graduating, Karen gained a real appreciation of life through her clinical pharmacy work in an intensive care unit at the Hospital for Sick Children, where she continues to practice today. Her fascination of life led her to go on and take courses in life coaching at the Coach Training Institute, followed by completing certification training in Dr. Rankin's Whole Health Medicine Institute, mindfulness and compassion training for healthcare professionals at Sarana Institute, mindfulness-based stress reduction at the Hospital for Sick Kids, and hypno-healing at the Hypno-Healing Institute. Karen currently coaches individuals and runs community programs called Life Chats and Soul School. She has appeared in local magazines, television, and a podcast sharing her thoughts on soul-related topics to a wide variety of audiences. Karen Sue-A-Quan is joined by Karen Agro. She is also a graduate from the University of Toronto's Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy and our Doctor of Pharmacy program, and holds a Master of Science from the McMaster University. As a classical guitarist and health advocate, she teaches people how to quickly shift their mood with music. Karen began studying classical guitar at the age of 5, first with Ray Seeley from Western University, and later with Eli Kastner of the University of Toronto, and Tim Phelan from Brock University. She participates in international guitar festivals and is an active performer at corporate venues, retirement communities, and yoga events. Her repertoire spans classical, Spanish, and contemporary music. Karen has been keynoting for the pharmaceutical industry and major pharmacy chains in Canada for the past 24 years and has appeared in the National Post in her pharmaceutical capacity and on CHCH Morning Live and on FM 98.5 in her musical capacity. Her pharmacy practice includes community-based care, pharmaceutical consulting, and professional speaking, running Agro Health Associates, Inc. for over 2 decades. Please help me welcome Karen Sue-A-Quan and Karen Agro, and I'll now hand it over to both of you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm just so grateful to the Faculty of Pharmacy, University of Toronto, for allowing Karen and I to bring this program forward and for us to give back. And I'm also grateful to my colleague, Karen Sue-A-Quan, who has opened my eyes to the whole range of ideas and thoughts around mindfulness and around creativity. And it's just made me take a deeper dive into both topic areas. For those of you who joined us at our mindfulness session, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to our session today, welcome to our session on creativity. So I would now like to take us through what we're going to be covering today. So We are going to spend the hour, and it's a beautiful day here in Southern Ontario. It's sunny. It feels like a July summer day. So I promise you we will keep it to the 1 hour, because I'm sure many of you are either watching this in your offices or perhaps sitting outside watching us on your laptops. So we're going to cover 4 topic areas. One is we're going to first look at what do we mean by the topic of creativity. We're going to look at what are the benefits of honoring our creative spark, because we all have it. Look at the risks of not honoring the creativity within us. And then finally look at how can we insert more creativity into our lives, because it is beneficial, and we're going to take you through exactly why that is. And then the very end of the presentation, we have 1 minute and 30 seconds of a slideshow to show you what thought leaders are thinking about in terms of creativity, both people who have gone before us and thought leaders that are currently amongst our midst. And it's set to music that I have played for you, and then we'll wrap up with a small call to action. So with that, we will get started on our first topic by what do we mean by creativity? And I must admit, when I started looking further into this topic, I, of course, like many of you, probably thought creativity means drawing or painting or playing an instrument. And it actually goes way beyond that. Creativity, in the book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way, she really refers to creativity as an experience. It's basically the use of imagination and original ideas to create something. It's solving problems. And the 3 kind of key things that I took away from looking into this further was we are creative as a species. We are born creative, and we are very unique, each and every one of us, in our creativity. And I love this quote by Picasso. Here we have a painting of a child doing finger painting, and every child is an artist. The problem is, how does he remain an artist once he grows up? We are our own worst enemies as adults. And especially for those of you who are watching who might be in pharmacy or in related careers, or even in completely different careers, we tend to censor our creativity as we grow up. It's because we tend to fall into a mold that might say we are this professional, or we have this job, or we have this role at home, when in fact creativity is within our souls and in our hearts. And it's very important to feed that creativity, because it really identifies who we are. This additional quote that I wanted to share with you is from one of the co-founders of positive psychology, and his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a big long name, but basically he, back in 1990, was one of the founders of what we call flow state. And I love this quote by him because it really does speak to what I identify as creativity. And I think my colleague Karen would too, in that creativity is a central source of meaning in our lives. Most of the things that are interesting, important, and human are the result of creativity. And when we're involved in it, we feel we're living more fully than during the rest of our life. And it really, to me, it speaks to that. I know when either I'm doing a creative pursuit, whether it might be baking or gardening or playing the guitar, it's where I identify who I am. And to steal from Karen's line that I love is she says, we're human beings, we're not human doings. And creativity speaks to us as a human being. All right. So I'm going to take you through 5 misconceptions, so myths and realities about creativity. And one of the big myths that are out there is that I don't draw or play an instrument, so therefore I'm not creative. And that's so not true. Creativity is all about solving problems. So if you are solving a problem, either at home or in your job or in your daily life, you are being creative. Look around you in your home. Everything around you really is a result of creativity. Garages, dishwashing machines, any kind of device that's in your home is a result of creativity because it was basically generated to solve a problem. So just because we don't have maybe an external manifestation of painting, for example, or playing a musical instrument, internally, we are all creative species. Another one that I love, and I must admit, I fall victim to this a lot, is if I wait long enough, inspiration will eventually find me. So I might wait, and eventually I'll get that creative spark. And the other part to that is, of course, fear of failure. So at any time you want to be creative or you're thinking about creativity, just try dabbling at whatever it is you might be interested in, because by allowing yourself to try things that might fail, you actually learn by that. And then the creative process continues, almost like a ball of yarn that's being rolled up and it's being created into something. So don't wait that long don't wait for the spark to hit you. Allow yourself to try things that actually may fail, because we all learn by that. Another fallacy is that to be truly original, I must avoid other people's ideas. And later in the presentation, I have a quote from Steve Jobs. And Jobs really does point out that everything that we see out there is basically a remix. Everything comes from something else. We look at other people's ideas, we think about other people's ideas, and we try to improve on those ideas. And if we see this in painting, we see artists taking ideas from other artists. We see this in music. Many composers have taken little themes or nuggets of a piece and then turn it into their own. So everything comes from something else and everything's a remix. So don't be afraid that you might actually be looking at someone else's idea and then building upon it. The fourth misconception is that I would be more creative if I was free of all time constraints or any constraints whatsoever for whatever resources you might think you're lacking. Because basically constraints magnify creativity. And we have seen this so much in COVID. If you look at healthcare and you look at education, talk about two areas where a constraint magnified creativity. Because constraints, particularly in the form of time constraints, forces us to quickly think of all the options, eliminate the ones that might not be possible, and then select and choose the ones that seem to work the best. We've seen this in education during COVID, where on a dime, everything had to change. And we've seen this in healthcare, where we thought, oh, we couldn't do virtual medicine, and now look at the way it's going. And for those of you who are watching who are coming from pharmacy has seen a massive change over the last year and a quarter. As a result of COVID, the constraints in our world have forced us to be creative and to change the way we do things. So we don't have to wait for a constraint to free us. If anything, constraints actually help us with our creativity. And the last misconception is that I need to stay a beginner to stay creative. And while beginners do have the benefit of no baggage, so they can come with a fresh set of eyes onto a project, by embarking on anything, you're no longer a beginner. So basically what we're saying is, if you look at a situation with beginner's eyes, then you are more likely to continue to be creative. But always remember, we don't have to stay a beginner to be creative. We are all born creative, but we then kind of teach ourselves to be uncreative. And then the last point I'd like to make on this area of what do we mean by creativity is this picture here from, basically it's an analogy from The Artist's Way. And what is spoke about in this book is that if we think of our mind as a room, and in our mind and in the room is what we think the world and our world should be. It has all the rules and what we should do and shouldn't do. Outside that room is all that other stuff. The things that we might not explore because, well, that's someone else's territory, or that's an idea that I just would not pursue. But if we open that door ever so little and let the light come in, we can actually infuse those ideas into our thinking and eventually step through that door into a creative space. So think of your mind as a room, think of the outside of the room as the opportunity, and open that door. And we'll do so in the next hour together as we talk further about creativity. So I'd now like to invite Karen, there she is, because we're going to go a bit back and forth, because I see Karen as such a creative person, and we really met through creative circles, or acquainted each other after 30 years of pharmacy. So Karen, we talk about the fact that we're all born creative, but what are some of your memories where you found yourself in a creative mind space?
Well, it's such a great memory lane when you look back as a child already about our creative innate nature, right? You talked about creativity being our natural spark, of creation. Like the fact that we just suddenly exist here on this planet, I think is such a creative spark already. But for me as a child, I remember daydreaming a lot, right? Like you know, people that look up at the clouds and wonder about the different shapes. I could really daydream about cloud formation, or even in the wallpaper, there are certain images that I was seeing through the obvious images, but I was seeing other things beyond what everyone else kind of sees. I think also creativity in our early years, we tend to get into a state of imagination and wondering and pondering. Like, you know how children ask so many questions. That's such a beautiful state, right? It's asking ourselves these questions of what if, or how come, or what about. Like for me, I used to ask myself questions like, what if trees felt stuck and they actually wanted to move but they couldn't? Would they feel sad that they can't move, right? Like who asks those kind of questions? Only a child would ask, but it triggers up that creative part of ourselves that we learn over time, like not to daydream, or that's such a silly thing to think about. So you start to internalize the expectations of the world around you, and it starts to slowly shut down our creative spark. But it's going back into imagination, pondering, asking questions that blow your own mind, and that has no answers. Go in that direction and explore. Just like Star Trek and Star Wars goes into the universe to explore, that's where that creativity really opens up the channels to exploration.
Right. So when my children kept asking me why, that's actually not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's great.
So what about the room analogy? So what's in your room right now and what's outside your room? And where might new ideas be brewing?
I think where my room is right now, like as you heard in the bio before, is all the different trainings, because I was pulled to learn about all of those things, mindfulness, soulfulness. So now where I am right now is all these learnings that I'm drawn to, that I'm so fascinated by. I like constantly think about it. I go to sleep with it. I wake up with it. And so now what am I supposed to do with all this passion within, right? And it's like wondering how to bring that further out there, and having these kind of conversations with other people that might be interested as well too. So that's kind of outside my door of gathering communities together or groups together to explore about life and what is beyond life, and having these exploration opportunities. So that's kind of where I'm heading towards. That's outside my door.
Interesting. So just as you get into it and you've explored yourself as a life coach, it's an evolution, right? It's like the what next.
Yeah.
It's not stagnant in any way, shape, or form.
That's right.
No.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to continue then from our room analogy into what are the benefits of honoring our creativity. And I'd like to just preface all of the benefits by saying honoring our creativity is like a mind shift, and it allows us to go someplace else in our minds without physically moving. And I think there's huge value in that right now, at any time really, but especially as we've been under almost over a year of uncertainty. And I must say, I do feel there's still uncertainty ahead. We are making progress, but it is helpful for us, for our minds, for our bodies, for just our own mental health and well-being, to take ourselves out of that, our current sort of stress area, and allow ourselves to explore, so that we can come back refreshed in what we're doing, either in our jobs or at home. So there's basically, we boiled it down to sort of 3 benefits of honoring our creativity. The first is stress relief. And it is known that pursuing creative activities, and this can be absolutely anything, releases dopamine. And it actually takes you into a meditative state. A colleague of mine in the drugstore, she's an amazing pharmacist, an amazing clinician, super detail oriented, but her passion is scrapbooking and card making. And before COVID, she would travel to these crafting retreats, and she still does them online, virtually during COVID. And whenever I ask her about she has this journal she carries around, and I ask her about what she's working on or when's the next event. It's like she's transported into a different space and time. She just almost changes her personality. You can see the passion that's coming from within her, and you can see the fun that she's having and how it improves her quality of life. So that's the first thing, is it definitely does relieve stress. And for all of you listening, you might be thinking, oh, right, Karen, well, I don't have time to do this. Well, we're going to talk about this as we go through, because you almost, after this presentation, I hope you realize that you actually can't afford not to pursue some creativity in your day or in your week or in your month or in your year, so that you can take your mind away from stressful situations, rejuvenate, and come back refreshed. The next thing about honoring our creativity is that it really stimulates our problem-solving skills. And this can transcend anything in our life. So it helps us become more resourceful, because it opens our mind to possibilities that we may not have considered before. I must admit, when I'm sitting down practicing guitar, or maybe I've gone out on a hike, which then stimulates, relaxes me, so that when I come back to my desk or to the guitar, I'm more refreshed. It's amazing how I can solve problems so much more rapidly and with a lot more clarity. The third component is self-awareness and self-expression. So honoring our creativity is the route to our authenticity. I'd like you to think for a minute, if there's been a time perhaps in your workplace where you have come up with a creative solution for your work team. And I'm speaking to anyone who's listening, whether you're in pharmacy or real estate or an accountant or working from home, or wherever your work is centered around. If you trust your inner self and allow yourself this period of self-expression and to voice that authenticity really does feel wonderful, both for yourself and for your mind. And so it allows you to access thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that you may not have considered before. I'd also like to mention that before COVID, many of you know I play guitar, I would play in festivals, or I'd play at retirement homes, or perhaps in a competition, and those were live experiences. But after COVID, I realized I have no way of reaching an audience, and I love connecting with people. So I decided to record some of my music, and with the help of my friend and music coach, Tim Phelan, we kind of agreed on, yeah, this is pretty good. It might be good enough to share with people. So I wanted to post it out onto Facebook and Instagram. Well, do you know how scared I was to do that? It was absolutely terrifying. I had everything ready, and I sat there with my finger over the submit button because I was so concerned about the self-expression. But once I did that, it opened up my opportunities in my mind for expressing myself and my route to authenticity. So it might feel scary to honor our creativity, but it is so good for us. And it one step leads to the next step, and it's amazing what opportunities come forward. Sorry, I just thought I was going to lose my screen there for a second. The third or the fourth component is faith and confidence in our instinct. The fact that you trust your instincts, that it teaches you to value your work, as I said, confidence in showing your work, and it transcends all areas of our lives. And then the last benefit to honoring creativity really boils down to freedom. It's a judgment-free zone. And as Karen spoke about, it's like a childlike freedom. There's no right or wrong, and it gives us permission to take risks and try new things. I don't know if anyone out there has read Jan Arden's book, If I Knew Then. I love Jan Arden. She's not only just a musician, but she's just a wonderful human being. And she has a quote in her books. I read the book recently, and it was sort of on the topic of freedom. And she said, being envious of other people's talents will make you bitter. Being envious of other people will steal your joy. Be yourself. Believe me, the sooner you're able to cheer yourself on, the better. Do what you do and be who you are. And really, creativity allows you to have that freedom to be who you are. And then the last point on benefit or honoring our creativity is really that by getting into a creative state, we can oftentimes get ourselves in what's called flow state. And flow state is when we're completely and fully present and immersed in activity. And by doing that immersion and being immersed, it allows our mind to rejuvenate. And I'll give you the example of my son, teenager. He gave me permission to share this story. He studies engineering at U of T, but he loves programming. And whenever he's computer programming, he can get into what I call flow state. And for 3 or 4 hours, he doesn't know what time it is. He's lost sense of space. He's lost sense of thirst, hunger. It's like it's in a complete immersion. And our father of positive psychology basically boiled flow state into this diagram that you see here. And he even went on to say that, and I must caveat this, that the best moments in our life are not necessarily those where we're passive and relaxing times. And trust me, I'm going to be the first person to get on an airplane as soon as we can. If I get to Manitoba and that's as far as I get, that's okay. But relaxation is super important for all of us. But actually, he goes on to say that the best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits, in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. So when we're in that area where our challenges are commensurate with our skills and our mind is able to focus on that, it actually is so beneficial for us, from a mental health perspective. So I'm going to bring Karen back on. There you are. And, just to have a chat, if you could just share with us and the audience for a moment about a story where you've honored your creative spark and what benefits it had for you.
Okay. So remember back in our discussion before, I was sharing a little bit about the childhood and what I would wonder about. I'd wonder about life, and I would wonder about where is the edge of life and afterlife? And that was when I was very, very young. I used to think about these kind of things. And then, fast forward later into my adult years after raising children and all of that, you start to, remember those feelings that you had when you were young and what caught your attention and where we have steered maybe a little bit away and then wanting to come back. And so some of my adventures seem to always revolve around life, even though I didn't realize it at that time. So one of the first creative things that I did was create life books for people where I would interview, let's say I interviewed you, Karen, and interviewed all the people around you to ask them, how did you impact them? Right. And I would take their interviews and add pictures of you and put it together in a book. And at that time, I had no idea how to make a book, right? I had to figure out online, how do you create a book? But somehow I created these life books that were hardcover bound. And it was so meaningful to people to see the impact that they were having on others. And the life book led to Life Chats, which was a forum where I felt compelled to have these kind of deeper conversations about life again. And didn't really know, was not an expert at it, but invited people together into my basement. And it was just phenomenal, right? The kind of deep conversations and revelations that came. So, and that led to Soul School, which was a forum that ended up being online because of COVID and having to figure out all of that. And talking about life again and afterlife, because a lot of people have started to lose people during this period. So kind of like bringing the spiritual world and the human world all together to have these kind of conversations. And that's kind of where creativity has led me to now. And when I think back, like even the work in the intensive care unit, that was a clue there too, because the ICU is at the edge of life and afterlife. So it's like all these things are pieces of the puzzle that you start to recognize, and you start to put the pieces together and start to see a bigger picture than what you saw before. And I'm sure there's so many other pieces that are still for me to find and to fit into my bigger picture of what Karen is all about.
It's fascinating because it's true, because even though you have pharmacy, in that ICU setting, that must just be such a conduit for you, both with the families and with the staff.
Yes.
To share your talents and how you've stepped into this role as a life coach.
It's all about the stories, right? Every patient comes in with their story, and I realize the significance of a life story and what life is all about. So that's why I'm just so fascinated about life and afterlife. But there was no courses to take about this, right, in school. So you just kind of naturally stumble upon the way that calls your spark to light you up inside.
So you've really been able to marry a very scientific based profession like pharmacy with life coaching, which really are two sides of a coin, right? They're overlapping as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Fascinating. Well, let's continue on and look at what happens if we don't honor our creativity. I'm getting really handy with this Zoom thing now. It's technology. So the risk of neglecting our creativity really, I think, falls into three buckets. We have our internal saboteurs, and Karen Sue-A-Quan taught me this word. This is me not pressing the send button on that video I wanted to post. This is me saying it's not good enough, or who am I to think that I'm able to step into this role. And then there's the external naysayers. And I have to say, external naysayers come in all walks of life. They can be in your job. They might even be in your home. They could be in your friend group. It's people who say, well, why would you want to do that? Or, what's the point of doing that? Or why is this important to you? So you've got the external people, you've got yourself. And then if you add a dose of perfectionism in there, and there's probably nobody out there listening right now who's a perfectionist. I'm saying that tongue in cheek. Many of us are, especially those in pharmacy circles, because our job is to get it right or close enough. And that if you add those three things together, you get into a situation where creativity can really suffer. And this slide captures from the pharmacist perspective. And for anyone, I also think, who probably works in a role where accuracy is very important. And this research was done by Zubin Austin and a group out of the University of Toronto Faculty of Pharmacy. Now, the research is 10 years old, but a lot of the still themes would apply. Mind you, pharmacy has taken a big shift in terms of scope of practice change over the last number of years, but some of the personality traits that are ingrained in us are. And when he first presented this at a Canadian Pharmacists Association conference, I was crying laughing because just the way he presented it, I could self-identify with each and every one of these. Lack of confidence, fear of new responsibility, paralysis in the face of ambiguity. Physicians are very good at making a decision and then moving forward. I've just looked at my options, and where pharmacists tend to hold back. Need for approval and being risk adverse. And if you look at this profile of these 5 personality traits, you can see why sometimes we can be our own internal saboteurs, because we're very good at saying, nay, it's not going to work, or questioning why and what's the point of going forward. In business, and for those of you who are watching who run businesses or work in a business, there are consequences of uncreativity. Because remember, I started off by saying creativity is solving problems. So if there was no creativity in business, we'd have no innovation and no differentiation at all whatsoever. And we would very much stick close to what we trust would work. So not all the options that are possible would be visible to us, because we would have our blinders on. We'd be very myopic. Complex problems, as a result, would be hard to solve, because if we don't have all of the options, when you're faced with a complex problem, you oftentimes have to be very creative and think through things that you've never considered before. I love this 5th one, and that's failure to seek and exploit opportunities. Now, I don't like the word exploit, but it really speaks to the story. For those of you who have heard this story of the 2 salesmen who are shipped off to a deserted, tropical island, and there's people on this island, and their job, these salesmen, are to sell shoes. And the salesmen get to the island, they realize, nobody wears shoes. This is a tropical island. Who needs shoes when you just have the beach and the sand and the sun? So the one salesman comes back to his head office and says, I see no opportunities. Why did you send me to this island? No one wears shoes. I have nothing to sell. The second salesman comes back and says, I see tons of opportunities. Nobody has shoes. Look at all the opportunities that I have to sell my product. So once again, it's looking at things from a fresh, creative mind. In the case of uncreativity, response to crisis is limited. We have been in a state of crisis for over 12 months now, and I can look across all sectors of business and see how people have been creative, whether it's retailers, restaurants, real estate, pharmacy, medicine, education. I mean, the list goes on. We have had to be creative in times of crisis, and that will continue if we continue with our creative minds. And then the inability to make creative ideas better. As I said, and as we watched with Karen, you know, it's one thing to step into a new role and to say, hey, I'm going to try this out and try out my creativity in this area, but it's continuing to foster that. So I'm now going to turn it over to Karen, and just, you know, following up on our discussion about creativity, when you think about creativity, what stops you? What stops you from tapping into your innate creative power?
I think if you had to sum it all, it would be the word FEAR, fear. Because there's a lot of different fears that roam around in our psyche, right? As I continue to share like the creative journey that I've been on, there is a fear of like initially like I don't know how to write a book, I'm not a writer, right? You say to yourself, oh, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. But somehow you find the courage to step into it or figure out how to overcome it. So that is one fear, that the fear that you're not good enough at whatever it is that you want to get into, right? It's also like the fear of not working out, right? I think when we first go on our journey, like I think of the different things that I've tapped on to thinking that this was my path of creativity. And initially I tapped into interior design, thinking that was the creative outlet. And while I was able to, you know, I enjoyed it and all that, it didn't quite hit home with me. And so, you know, when something doesn't quite hit home, it's giving you a bit more, but not quite that, right? It's that fear that that's not it, or it didn't end up being where you want it to be. And I think that's another one of those saboteurs that we self-sabotage, saying, well, we don't know exactly where we're going, but we don't need to. Like, I think that piece of information that it wasn't quite that gives us more information about ourselves, of what really hits us at the heart center. So after that, I continued doing like the life coaching and the spiritual part. And that started to really light up something within so much that I know this is my life purpose. I know this is all what I'm about to do. And but it's also the fear of judgment, right? Because, you know, you're a pharmacist, Karen. Like, what do you mean you're going into spiritual life coaching? Like, how do you merge, right, the science and spirituality? I've gotten a lot of those comments as well, too. So it's like the fear of judgment of others, or also of ourselves, too. I could say to myself, like, who are you, Karen, to have these conversations about what life is all about and what is in the afterlife? Like, you haven't died to know what happens, right? So there's a lot of judgment that happens as well, too. And also the fear of not excelling at it. And I think you touched upon it, Karen, that part of our training as pharmacists is that we had to get certain grades to even be eligible to be considered. So we learned to be perfect or excel at something in order to achieve it. And I think in that creative journey, I think it's just about taking the steps and learning the experiences from it, rather than you have to excel at something. The excellence starts to come with more and more courage and more and more.
Oh, I think she froze. I think I'm not sure. Oh, there you are.
It's not a mental excellence, right? It's a heart and soul fire that starts to happen.
Right. You just froze for a second there, but yes, okay. I think you got the essence of that. What about, what does it feel like to be in a non-creative state?
Yeah, I think for me, it would feel stagnant. It would feel comfortable because you've been doing it for so long, whatever it is, and you've already excelled at it, and you stay in that comfort zone. but there's no real excitement. It's like every day is the same and you're not sure, what you got out of that day, because that day just flew by. And so it's kind of the same. So I think the stagnancy, the routine, and sometimes life is easy in that non-creative place because you're comfortable. You know what to expect, and you know that you excel at it. So that's where the mind wants to keep you at. It doesn't want to allow you to expand into your fullness, your full potential of all the things that might still be drawing upon you. And it could be a little boring too, I think.
Yeah, I could identify with that because I think it's so easy. And I'm speaking to anyone who's listening out there who's thinking, well, I might be creative in this area, or I'd like to experience an area of creativity that maybe I did before, but I shelved because of the kids or because of work or whatever. And when you come back into that space, it's so easy to fall back into the routine of every day versus actually carving out the time for creativity so that you can feel fulfilled. It's almost like, they say if you want to do exercise, you just put it in your calendar. You have to put it in your calendar and book a date with yourself. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's that if you don't find that time, I'm just going to be sitting there scrolling on Facebook and Instagram. Like I could use that. And you wake up and it's an hour later or 45 minutes later, and you darn it, I could have actually done something. I could have gone in the garden. I could have baked. I could have done something instead of being in front of a screen. And then as a consequence, then you feel you've robbed yourself of that creativity, and then you feel that stagnancy. Would you say that is
Absolutely
real?
Absolutely. For me, I think the intensive care taught me that, that underlying message that we take our lives for granted, how many days we have, and we think we're going to live forever. But as I saw the stories and patients coming in, I realized we all have that moment when we're called upon to enter another dimension. And so what do I want to do with my life now here on earth, right? What is important to me? What is it that I'm drawn to? What am I sparked by? And I start to think about life in that way and start to design my life in that way of the things that mattered and the things that sparked me. And those became my driving decisions in life.
It's very interesting because it's almost like when you have that experience of seeing someone in an ICU, or many of us who are watching this now, I know I've lost people in my life. And when it's like you go from one having them to not having them. And it's a terrible feeling. It's awful, but it's certainly an eye opener, right? It certainly jolts you back into use the good dishes, smash the good dishes. It really doesn't matter. Just do what you want to do. Because why not, right? And we see there's risks in the why not. Yeah. Okay, let's continue on and look now into more actionable items in terms of, I'll just share my screen again, in terms of how can we insert more creativity in our lives so that we can have the benefits and that we don't suffer from the risks. And this picture is really important to me. I took this with my phone, okay? And what this is a little egg stand about half a kilometer from my house. I run by it every morning. To me, this picture sums up creativity. This is a little egg farm that started up during COVID. One of my neighbors started it for his two 11-year-old twin boys. They had a little bit of property, they had a barn, and they decided to get some chickens. And in doing so, they just created this whole creative outlet for these boys. And what you don't see in the back is the barn. So that's production. The silver container there, that's warehousing. That's where they put the eggs in a cooling facility so that when people come buy them, they're fresh. And sales and marketing is the sign you see. free range, omega-3, fresh. You don't see the sales sign, it's off to the side for the pricing, but these boys can't keep up with the demand. They cannot get enough eggs out of those chickens to actually, and the hens to actually sell. Supply is outstripping, demand is outstripping supply. And this is such a creative outlet for them. So when we talk about how can we insert creativity in our lives, it comes in many different forms. Now, there are many people out there who have this sort of bridging of the left brain and right brain, which Karen spoke to in terms of the life coaching and pharmacy. And I did a very scientific research project last week. I'm saying that tongue in cheek. I did an Instagram survey. Some of you may have seen it, or I asked you and the social media folks out there, did you know that Einstein played the violin? And he affectionately nicknamed his violin Lena. Well, actually, all his violins, he called them Lena. And when I got the responses back, only 29% of people knew. Now, this is not, obviously a scientific rigor, but about 30% of people knew that Einstein played the violin. 70% did not. Same goes with the question around Art Garfunkel. I didn't know this in researching into this topic further to pull this presentation together, that Art Garfunkel holds a master's in mathematics, and he continued to sing and songwrite all during that time. And it was, confirmed on the internet, 33% of people did not know Art Garfunkel held a master's in mathematics. So it goes to show you that there are creatives out there that are scientific, and there are the science people out there that are creative. And the list goes on. I mean, Leonardo da Vinci, Bach was told, people say that his music comes from a mathematical basis. That's hotly debated, but it's certainly a consideration. Dr. Brian May from Queen was an astrophysicist. Ben Franklin, I believe, played the violin, and Condoleezza Rice was a concert pianist. So there are people out there famous people who have been doing this, and many of us aren't even aware of it. Louis Armstrong said, "What we play is life." And Jerry Fankhauser, who is one of the fathers of the book on affirmations, says that affirmations are like prescriptions for certain aspects of your life you want, or yourself you want to change. And to Karen Sue-A-Quan's point, she said, I am going to be a life coach. I want to do this as part of who I am and part of my contribution to myself and the world. And by saying that I am, she stepped into that by making the affirmation. So it goes that if you say you want to do it, or you say you're going to do it, just say you're doing it. And it's amazing how by stepping, the ground will come up to meet you, and what magic can actually happen. So how can we insert creativity in our daily life? I mean, this list could go on. We just included a few ideas here, but we put it here just to stimulate thought as you're listening. But you could learn a new skill, or perhaps revisit an old one, or perhaps do something you've always wanted to do. Another idea is to create a creativity swipe file. And we'll talk to Karen about this in a minute, but what I have is actually a file folder, both an electronic one and a physical one, of music I've always wanted to learn. And when I'm working on current repertoire, but I see things I'm interested in, I'm kind of like squirrel. Oh, I'd like to do that. So instead of completely getting distracted, I throw it in my swipe file. And then when I really feel like just letting loose, I pull out that file and I just start sight reading these pieces. I'm not playing them well. I can barely even make the melody sound proper. But it allows me, again, to be creative and think, I could use that piece for this event, or envision playing it at such and such. And it just stimulates my creativity and keeps me expanding in my repertoire and in my headspace. You can set up a creative workspace. In my home, I have a space that's literally, I would say, 3 feet by 3 feet. And all it has is my chair, a plant, some indirect lighting, and a candle. And that is my creative space. I position my chair not into the room, but out of the room so I can see out the window. And that is when I step into that space, then I feel, calm, I can focus. And it's actually quite ironically right beside my work desk, but I don't even see the desk when I'm in my creative workspace. And it doesn't take a lot of space. It's literally a 3 foot by 3 foot space. You could go on an artist date with yourself. A good friend of mine, Tara Ladd, she is a neurologist here in Waterdown, and she gave me permission to use her story. And she is a very busy health practitioner. Her husband is also a specialist, and they have 2 young children. Before COVID, she would go on an artist date with herself. We have a little place in Waterdown called the Creative Hub, and she likes to play in pottery. So she would just go to open pottery time and create once a week. And when she couldn't go once a week, she would get there as often as she could. And it was just, I was just fascinated by the fact that she would give herself permission to leave, all her responsibilities and just give that time to herself to feed her own creative needs. And as a consequence, it opened my eyes to, more possibilities. Another idea is journaling or writing morning pages. Now, I must admit, this is not for me. Journaling is not a thing I can do. If I wake up in the morning, open my eyes and say, I'm grateful for being alive, that's about the extent of it. I'm up and I'm off for my day. But journaling works for some people. It's a brain dump. And some advocates of journaling say to actually sit down for 15 to 30 minutes and just get all your thoughts on paper. I mean, if you can do that, great. But the possibilities are essentially endless. In professional life, there are so many opportunities for creativity. For the pharmacists out there, I have a picture here of the Niagara Apothecary. And evolution comes from creativity. Pharmacy started basically from plants. And then we moved into obviously solid oral dosage forms and biologics and implantable devices. The possibilities again are endless. But we started from very simple plant-based chemistry and moved it forward. New ways of delivering services are another way of infusing creativity in your professional life versus saying we've always done it this way. And that could apply to any sector. And we've seen how many business sectors, including pharmacy, have pivoted and needed to look at doing it a different way. There's innovative patient care services and efficiencies in workflow. The last 2 points I'd like to highlight are technology creation. We oftentimes think of technology as not creative, but it is super creative. Think of the apps and computer programs, even the fact that we're here on Zoom. Like many of us couldn't spell Zoom a year ago. Now we live on Zoom. I mean, now we're getting zoomed out. But technology is a creative pursuit. And as our pain points, whenever we have a pain point, it's an opportunity to tap into our creativity. And we have seen that as well over the past 12 months. Before I turn it back to Karen, I'd just like to say that Julia Cameron, who is the author of The Artist's Way, said, I've learned as a rule of thumb never to ask whether you can do something. Say instead that you're doing it, then fasten your seatbelt. The most remarkable things follow. And I hope just by talking about some of these ideas, we've stimulated thinking for you in terms of the remarkable things that you can also be involved in and that you can pursue from a creative activity. So Karen, just as we finish this fourth component and before we move into the 1 minute reflection, how do you insert creativity in your life?
I loved everything you were talking about because it triggered like little bits and pieces of how we do it. I'm like you, I have a little corner and a chair with a plant next to it. It's sitting across from an open window because I'm drawn to the outdoors and the blue sky. So, it's creating that creative space within your home that is fulfilling what it is that you need to make you feel soothed inside, like a cup of tea, that type of thing. So it's creating that physical space first. I think the mental part of creating creativity is starting to evaluate what are the things in your life that takes away from the energy of joy or fulfillment, and reevaluating, do you still want to be part of that? So I've had to let go some of the pieces in my life, and that opens up the space for other things. So what I say to my clients is like, when you say no to something, you're actually saying yes to something else, right? So evaluating what you're saying no to and what you're saying yes to. And hopefully those yes pieces are things that light you up from within. Like you, I have a folder, or it's my computer. You have musical notes and stuff. I have life lessons that I've been collecting, that I've been writing out, like all the different life lessons that I've learned along my journey. And I'm past 50, so I have 50 lessons in 50 years. And also the life stories from the ICU, like how those patients taught me something about life, and I'm capturing those stories too. So that becomes part of my creative dump into a place where I know I'm going to do something with it to help others with all of the life lessons.
Super.
Yeah, yeah.
That's well, what I'd like to do now is in the last 1 minute and 30 seconds of our presentation, I'd like to invite everyone to watch the very brief slideshow that we've put together. It's literally just over a minute, and reflect. Think about what could you do to bring more creativity in your life or to enhance what you're already doing. Read the quotes, and we've got everything from Steve Jobs to Dr. Seuss on what people view, how others have viewed creativity, and listen to the music, which I recorded for the slide presentation, and just think about creativity from your perspective. And then we'll come back on camera just to say a few closing remarks. So let's see if I can make this slide share work. All right. All right. We just lost the last little note there. So I'll invite Karen Sue-A-Quan to turn on her camera for one more moment, and just to say a few closing remarks. So Karen, any last moments before we close off?
I would just probably like to say, I believe that creativity is the portal to our soul. It is the channel in which it touches us about something that's meaningful to us. So it hits us at the heart. And it's overcoming some of the mental obstacles and allowing ourselves to feel more the meaning and the purpose in life, and allowing that creative spark to flow through us.
Awesome. And I would agree with all that, and just say, honor your creativity, recognize that it comes from within us. And by doing so, you honor yourself and give back to the people around you. So on that note, it's 12:58. We're just wrapping up. So I'd like to thank Karen Sue-A-Quan for all of her input and insight, and also to the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy for allowing us to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.